Alrighty, so in this video we are going to be talking about the RequireJS Shim config. Now this is important for you guys who have legacy code that you want to be able to load in to your new awesome gulped, babbled RequireJS module loading system, but you can't necessarily edit it or alter it to conform with the AMD specification. So remember, RequireJS is an AMD loader, and we're going to want to make sure that that all of our stuff works with it. So primarily we have two concerns. Our modules that are not AMD are going to have imports and exports. Now, fortunately, most library files, most libraries that you're going to see in modern JavaScript are going to work with AMD or CommonJS, or preferably they'll be wrapped in a UMD so they work automatically in CommonJS and AMD. So we can actually open up the jQuery source code and see it right there. If I open up jQuery dist, notice here all the way at the top, it does an AMD export. Also, if we go ahead and look at jQuery UI and open up jQuery UI.js, check this out. jQuery UI is also AMD compatible. It defines jQuery as a dependency. So that's why jQuery UI will magically work. You import jQuery UI with RequireJS, it's going to also pull in jQuery, and everything will be awesome. Lodash as well, if you scroll all the way to the bottom here, which for some reason I already am, you can see that it also exports itself in AMD. Basically, if you see a type of define AMD anywhere in the source code, it probably is completely compatible with AMD loaders. But again, what if you have code that is not AMD compatible? Well, let's go ahead and make a misbehaving script file. So I'm going to open my public scripts. Now, I'm doing this in public scripts. I'm not doing this in source scripts. I'm doing this in public scripts. And I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it bad.js. So bad.js is going to have a dependency on jQuery, and it's going to define two functions. So I'm going to write function func1, which is simply going to do p, hey there, 1, p, and then append to body. And I'm missing some parentheses right there. And I'll go ahead and copy and paste it just for fun and make a func2 that has the hey there 2 that appends itself to the body. Okay, so we have a bad module, a module that does not define itself in a way that AMD accepts. So what happens when we load this guy in? Let's go over to index.html, and instead of RequireJSing application, I'm going to RequireJS in bad. So that's this bad file right here. Now I'm going to come back over into my Chrome window, and I'm going to refresh. Well, first of all, let's go ahead and do bad, and then let's do function bad, and then do bad.func1 and bad.func2. And even, let's go ahead and do console log bad there as well. All right, so what do you think the output of this is going to be? If we hop over into Chrome, hit F5, notice how it says undefined. So it's loading the module, it found the file, but then the module didn't return anything. It didn't tell AMD, hey, there's an object that I want you to use when someone else depends on me. It didn't do that. So what we get back is undefined. And then, of course, when we try to invoke a method on it, we get cannot read property of undefined. So that's a problem. But the script executed in the global context, so we do have global access to func1. So this func1 method or function was defined on our window object, and I can execute it. But when I execute it, it says reference to error, money is not defined, so jQuery has not been included. In fact, there is no jQuery on this. Well, there is a little helper here from Chrome that, but it isn't jQuery, so that's the point. The money is defined, but it's not jQuery. And that only happens when we're inside the console. It's just this nice little helper for doing DOM manipulation on existing sites that do not import jQuery. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is we need our bad JavaScript file to result in jQuery being loaded, because, I mean, this wouldn't be very fun. If I did RequireJS jQuery followed by RequireJS bad, I mean, that'll work. I could do that. I can come over here and hit F5, and we still get the error, func1 is not a function, but now I can go ahead and just type in func1, and hey there 1 gets printed out to the screen. So that'll work, but that's not a good idea. That's a terrible idea. Don't ever do that. Don't ever do that, because it's bad that's wanting jQuery. We don't want to have to know what it depends on. Well, we kind of do have to know what it depends on, but not when we import it. We want to jump into our config, and we want to go ahead and tell RequireJS that whenever we load in bad needs to have jQuery loaded. If it's not loaded already, go out and load it. So how do we do that? We use the Shim config. Now, the Shim config is really straightforward, and you can read more about it in the docs, but I'm just going to go ahead and continue this simple example. So, not surprisingly, I'm going to add a Shim property. Inside of Shim, I'm going to reference the module name, in this case, bad, and I'm going to give it an object. And this object is what's going to be used to define its imports and its exports. So what does it require? That's defined with the deps property, and it's going to require in jQuery. So you do deps equals your list of modules that you want to load. So what this is going to result in happening is when bad is imported, jQuery is imported first. Now, jQuery exports a global object that is attached to our window. So we can still, inside of our bad, we can still access our jQuery object, our money object. So if I come over here and hit refresh, notice how we still get a type error because we haven't exported anything yet. But if I run func1, it'll work without manually having to require in jQuery because, again, jQuery was loaded automatically by RequireJS. So that's all well and good, but I'm still having this problem where I'm not getting anything back. I'm saying type error cannot read func1 if undefined. So if I did some import syntax, if I did something like, let's pretend that we're in a CS ES 2015 file here for just a moment. So if I said import all as bad from bad, right? What is this bad object going to be? If I did that? Well, right now it'll be undefined. That's what's being returned here on line 15. So how do we fix that? Well, not surprisingly, we can go ahead and do an exports. So an exports a list of or exports a particular function. So I can say exports equals, and then in quotes I can say func1. So now if I come over here and refresh, notice how that thing is now func1, but I'm still getting an error. It says bad func1 is not a function because, well, it's not. The entire bad thing is a function. So I could do bad as a function and invoke it, but I can't do bad func1 and func2. So another way to do it is to use the init function. So I'm going to say init function money, and then I'm going to say return func1 is this.func1, func2 is this.func2. If I come back here and refresh, check that out. It works. We got an object back. We got an object back with func1 and func2. So what's going on here? The init function takes in a function that takes in a list of all your dependencies. So in this case, we're dependent on jQuery. If I also wanted to depend on Lodash, I could also do that. So your parameters for this function are filled in by your dependencies. And then I can return an object, and this object is going to be what this module is loaded as. So when I load it in, this is what I get back. So this is an object with two functions on it, this func1 and this func2. So what is this? This is the context that this module was executed in. Now, our object is still going to be registered because since it's executing on the global context on the window, I can still reference these funcs directly through the window object. I'm not going to recommend people try to remove these objects from the global context, because if your code worked before with polluting your window object, your code will still work now. I encourage people to slowly move their legacy projects to using some sort of module loader, and I encourage future code to actually import these modules directly, but they will also register and pollute your global namespace. That's not a good thing, and it would be resolved if you started defining things in AMD, but you know, such is life. So yeah, what if I wanted to go ahead and create a plugin, just a really simple jQuery plugin? And again, this is just another example of what you can do here. And this will be particularly useful for people who use libraries with plugins like jQuery or Moment. So if I went over here and I created a file under scripts called badplugin.js, and the way you would define a plugin jQuery without AMD or a self-executing function would be money.fn.bad equals function. And then I'm going to say something like this HTML bad plugin. No AMD, not sad. Or not happy, rather. And then return this. Alright, so straightforward bad plugin. If in index.html I went ahead and did a RequireJS on bad plugin, and then I wanted to import jQuery as well, or, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and import jQuery as well so I can use that. So jQuery. So then I did bad, well, I'm actually not going to import jQuery here for this example. And then I'll just do bad, and then I'll do something like, we'll assume that this plugin exports jQuery after it's been modified, and then I'll do money body dot bad, right? So if I wanted to fix this, what I would do is I would come back into our config, I would add another shim for bad plugin, and its depths would be jQuery. And then its export would be our money. So we're exporting jQuery out of this after we modified it. So coming back to our example application, refresh, and then we get a bad plugin, no AMD, replacing all of our content. So again, this is how you shim things in. It's a pretty straightforward. You'll have to do this for all of your files that you that don't support AMD. I really encourage people to use proper modules. For new applications, there's no excuse for your entire application to be AMD compatible. But when you pull in something a little nasty that doesn't quite work with AMD, you're going to have to shim it in, and this is how you do it. Now, of course, sometimes things will just magically work even if you don't shim things in. For example, like what I was doing before, if I did not have this shim in here, and I loaded in jQuery, but I loaded in jQuery first. So if I did a RequireJS jQuery function money, and then did another RequireJS of bad plugin function, without the shim, this will still work. So if I come back here and hit F5, it still works. This is problematic. So the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes your stuff will just work because you're polluting your global namespace with jQuery and then your bad plugin, and you didn't need to specify that you wanted to load in jQuery first because it was already loaded in. So I'm pointing this out and trying to make a point of this. You guys are probably sick of me talking about this already, but there is a reason. Is because it's very possible when porting over a legacy application to using modules, particularly with RequireJS and AMD, you'll run into situations where your stuff will just work, your legacy will just work, but then suddenly you'll make a change somewhere, and the order that your modules get loaded in changes, and you'll get an error. Then you'll start freaking out, like, what happened? This stuff was working before, but now it's not. Because remember, if I took out that out of the order, now it's no longer going to work because jQuery was never loaded. Well, if you start running into random 404s, your list of things to check are, first, are you using extensions? Because you shouldn't. Second, are you using a module that isn't AMD compatible? Third, if you are using a module that is AMD compatible, are you defining or declaring the appropriate dependencies? And that's your checklist of things to do when you run into random 404s that weren't there previously. This happens more than you think, especially when porting over legacy applications. So again, I'm just making a point of it to make sure people don't start freaking out when they start using RequireJS and then get frustrated that, oh no, it's not working. Well, there's probably a reason it's not working. Once you get a little bit of experience with this, it turns into second nature. So I think that's it. I think that's all I wanted to talk about in regards to shims. So I guess in the next video, we're going to talk about production builds because those are super important. All right, we'll see you guys then.